We live in a culture addicted to loudness. We are told from every screen, every pulpit of power, that voice is the only currency of value. To be someone is to be heard. To be powerful is to dominate the narrative, to drown out the opposition, and to occupy the center of the town square. In our political discourse, in our social media feeds, and even in our religious institutions, we have equated victory with the ability to shout the loudest. We are conditioned to believe that if you are silent, you are weak. If you are quiet, you're complicit. If you do not defend yourself, you are defeated. But today is Good Friday, the day the world's noise reaches a fever pitch and then met with an immovable silence. Today, the liturgy of the church pulls out of the digital stream and into a different frequency. We stand before the shadow of the cross, not merely a religious symbol, but a Roman instrument of state sponsored terror. The cross was designed by the empire to be a loud message. This is what happens to those who dream a different world. This is what happens to the poor who demand bread. This is what happens to the prophet who speaks of a kingdom not based on Caesar's coin. Yet in the heart of this state-sanctioned violence, we found a counterintuitive phenomenon, the submissive silence of love. As we look at the ancient song of the servant in Isaiah 52 and 53, we are not looking at a victim who has given up. We are looking at a revolutionary who has moved beyond words. We are looking at a love so radical that it refuses to play by the rules of an oppressive world. A love that realizes that to argue with a corrupt system is to give that system legitimacy. In this next time, as we explore the theme of love in silence as a form of radical solidarity, we see how Christ's refusal to speak before his executioner was the ultimate act of standing with every person throughout history whose voice has been stolen, whose dignity has been stripped, and whose life has been deemed expendable by the powers that be. To understand Isaiah 52 and 53, we must read it as a liberation text born from the ashes of trauma. The original audience was a community of exiles in Babylonian. They were the displaced people, victims of imperial expansion and ethnic cleansing. They had seen their holy city burned, their temple leveled, and their children led away in chains. They are living in a noisy empire, one that boasts of its gold, its gods, and its inevitability. Babylon told them that their God was a failure and their identity was a relic. And in the ancient Near East, greatness was a zero-sum game. It was defined by Caesar, the Pharaoh, and the Babylonian king. Greatness was a boot on the neck and a name carved into a stone. Into this collective PTSD, the prophet Isaiah breathes a servant song. This figure isn't a conquering general or a wealthy benefactor. He is described as a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Historically, this passage was a theological hand grenade. It turned the success gospel of the ancient world on its head and dared to suggest that God is not found in the marble halls of the palaces or the victory parades of the generals, but in the despised and the rejected. The historical context reveals a God who chooses to be with the loser, the exile, the refugee, and the prisoner. This was a direct, dangerous critique of the might makes right theology that governed the ancient world, and if we are honest, governs our own. Isaiah 53 provides a haunting map of what it means to bear the weight of a broken societal system. We start with the silence of the unseen. He had no beauty or majesty, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. In our era of aesthetic perfection, influencer culture, and the carefully cultivated branding of leaders, the servant's silence begins with his lack of status. Jesus was a peasant, a member of a colonized ethnic minority living under the heel of Rome. His silence is the silence of the essential worker who is ignored until systems break. It is the silence of the migrant mother at the border, the person living in the wrong zip code, the trans teenager whose humanity is debated but whose voice is never centered. Love in silence means God chooses to enter history through a body that the world has deemed unremarkable and disposable. We come to the silence of the scapegoat. We considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. Here, Isaiah identifies the social scapegoat, the mechanism that still drives our country today. Systems of power always need someone to blame for societal rot. We blame the poor for poverty. We blame the marginalized for the loss of national identity. We blame the other to distract from our own greed. Isaiah tells us that the servant absorbs these projections. On the cross, Jesus was canceled by the religious elite and executed by the political state. He took the noise of their collective hatred, the spitting, the mocking, the false witnesses, and he didn't throw it back. He stopped the cycle of violence by refusing to pass on the pain. This is the silence of absorption. It's the radical refusal to engage with the eye for an eye logic that keeps the world in a state of perpetual war. It is the silence that says the cycle of hate ends with me. And lastly, there is the silence before the state. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. When Jesus stood before Pilate, the representative of the world's most powerful empire, he remained remarkably and maddeningly quiet. Why? Because the court was a sham. The system was rigged. To defend him would be to acknowledge that Pilate's court had moral authority to judge the truth. By staying silent, Jesus exposed the impotence of the state. He showed that you can kill a body, but you can't kill a soul. His silence was a non-violent protest. It was a holy hunger strike of the spirit. He refused to give the empire the satisfaction of his defense because the empire had no jurisdiction over the love he represented. Isaiah 53 is the heartbeat of a larger biblical theme, the God of the underdog. We see this in the book of Exodus. The Hebrew slaves groaned in silence of Egypt before liberation. The servant's silence proceeded a new kind of exodus, a liberation not just from a physical Pharaoh, but from a spiritual and systematic Pharaoh of greed, white supremacy, and patriarchy. We hear echoes of Mary's radical song in Luke 1. She promises that God would lift up the lowly and send the rich away empty. Isaiah 53, visually representation of that prophecy. The servant is lifted up, specifically because he was lowly. And then comes the new covenant of inclusion. This passage breaks down the insider and outsider walls by being numbered with the transgressors. Jesus permanently identifies with the criminal, the outcast, and the sinner. He moves the center of the gospel to the margins. He doesn't speak out to our country today. And how does this speak out to our country today, a nation fractured by deepening inequity, racial tension, and shouting match culture? We hear it in the noise of the privilege. Often those of us with privilege use our own noise to drown out the lived experiences of the suffering. We offer thoughts and prayers as noisy distractions from the silent, gritty work of justice. Isaiah 53 calls us to shut up and listen. It calls the church to listen, to be silent long enough to hear the groaning of creation and the cries of those who have been crushed by our economic systems. We see the violence of the system in our country. We see servants who are cut off from the land of the living through mass incarceration that targets black and brown bodies, through the lack of health care for the poor, and through environmental deregulations of vulnerable communities. When we see the crushed in our cities, we are looking at a contemporary face of the suffering servant. Love in silence means we stop justifying these systems with noise and start dismantling them with our lives. And lastly, there's the power of the nonviolent resistance. Isaiah's servant reminds us that there is power that is greater than the sword or the riot gear. It is the power of the one who says, "You can do your worst to me, but I will not become like you." This is the silence of the sit-in, the silence of the peace march, the silence of the whistleblower who risks everything to speak truth to power. As we leave this Good Friday service, we are called not to a quiet faith that hides in the pews, but to a quietly revolutionary life that challenges the status quo. We need to silence our egos and amplify the oppressed. I challenge you to use your social platforms, your daily conversations, not to talk about yourself, but to amplify a voice that the world tries to silence. Don't post a Good Friday selfie. Post the story of a refugee, a prisoner, or a struggling worker. Let your silence be the space where someone else's voice finally finds the room to breathe. Next, we need to fast our part of complicity. Examine the noise of our consumption. Are you buying products that are made through the crushing of the workers in the global south? Take one step to divest from a system of exploitation. Let your wallet be silent in the face of corporations and their greed. Support local, ethical, worker-owned initiatives. Visit the tombs of society. Go where the world doesn't want you to look. Visit a nursing home, a community center in the neglected neighborhood, or a protest line for workers' rights. Don't go with a sermon or a fix-it attitude. Go with love and silence of Jesus. Simply sit, simply see, simply acknowledge the humanity of those whom society has deemed despised and rejected. At the end of today, at the tomb, it is a place of absolute silence. To the empire, this silence was proof of their victory. To the religious elite, the silence was proof of their righteousness. To the disciples, the silence felt like the end of hope. But we must learn to see the silence of Good Friday not as an ending, but as a germination. A seed makes no noise when it falls into the earth. It makes no noise when it cracks open and dies to its former self so that new life might emerge. The love and silence that Jesus practiced on the cross was a planting of a seed that would eventually crack the foundation of the Roman Empire and the very empire that has followed it. When you leave today, do not be afraid to be quiet. Do not feel the need to fill the air with explanations or defenses. Instead, let the silence of the servant sink into your bones. Let it soften your heart toward your enemies. Let it strengthen your resolve to stand with the crushed. We leave the servant in the tomb of world's injustice, but we leave with the knowledge that the silence of the tomb is not the silence of defeat. It's the quiet gathering energy of a revolutionary of love that the world cannot understand and the empire cannot stop. Wait in silence. Watch in the silence. For in the quiet of this Friday, the loud power of death has already begun to unravel. Love has spoken, and it says everything by saying nothing at all. Amen.